Our movie has to deal with different scales. By scales, I mean the height, people at different heights.
One of the important things about Lord of the Rings is just the relationship of hobbits to humans, and that all has to do with size. And technically speaking, in terms of the visual effects, is going to be a huge part of selling the visuals of the show.
Okay, Caro, we're ready for a rehearsal.
Andrew and Peter did a lot of experimentation with camera angles and eye lines early in the pre-production stage of the film to figure out exactly what kind of angles they would be using and how to light for it. And obviously you want to use the technique that sells the scale issue, but you want to rely on the quickest of ways to do it as often as you can that don't destroy that illusion.
All people need for scale is a reference to something of a different size, and that gives you your scale. We did scale tests in pre-production, and we basically staged shoots where we picked scenes from the inside of the prancing pony. And we had big sets and small sets, so we had the different scales. And we had someone playing Frodo, and we would be staging these, different looks, and we would be experimenting with different lighting, and we would be experimenting with depth of field. And we would try out all these techniques in order to sort of work out what worked and what didn't, so that by the time we actually started principal photography and we had the cast on set, that we weren't going to waste their performance.
One of the first things that Peter came to us with was these still photos to show us what he was thinking in terms of framings for shots that actually featured actors of regular stature, if you will, and what the hobbits would be. How you could match eye lines, what looked good and did not look good. Would it look ridiculous if you had actors of normal stature? Did you want their heads to be bigger? How would big furry feet work? All those kinds of things. So all of that work was to make sure that we weren't crazy to actually try and do it the way we were thinking.
This is the hobbit-sized bar of the prancing pony.
Weta Workshop was working on what's the physical way we're going to achieve this on set, to do things in camera. And Weta Digital was working on how are we going to be able to shoot elements that we can later manipulate and create the effect.
A traditional technique that's been used for years is force perspective, in which if you have two people of the same height and you want to make one of them look smaller, you simply take that person further away from the camera. So suddenly the camera is seeing somebody close at a certain height and somebody further away at a smaller height.
Now, the force perspective technique is based upon a camera being static, restricted to movements of pan and tilt only. I did give a little talk to some of the guys about a week before they started, just the crew, about, force perspective and how it works.
As long as I stayed behind it, like this, I would appear to be behind the same thing that, that Lisa is sitting on.
There's still a sort of wonderful immediacy about the force perspective process because you got it all on the camera.
The difference between a hobbit and a human, it's like 0.75 is a hobbit to a human, which if you invert that, a person needs to be roughly a 1 1/3 times further away than what they would have to be if they were really a hobbit. So if you wanted Frodo and Gandalf to be standing side by side and they're 10 feet away from the camera, then you would want to put Frodo 1 1/3 times further away than that.
We also used a lot of duplicate set work and prop work for different scales of people to act against. We really just used a slide rule and scaled up and scaled down accordingly. Some examples of this are Bag End Interior, where we built two versions of the same set, exact replicas of each other at two different scales.
A large-size scale for Ian Holm to appear in, and a small scale, a Hobbit-size scale, for Ian McKellen to walk through.
Primarily on the small set, we had to spend days and days and days filming, and what was essentially like filming in a submarine. It was that crammed and that small.
Everything that we did almost had to have several scales to accommodate and make this illusion come across on screen.
Every book in the bookshelf of Bag End, every piece of parchment, every prop had to be built perfectly replicated at two different sizes.
You would build Gandalf's cart in two different scales, and it also had a force perspective split rig on it so that you could get Gandalf and Frodo sitting side by side, apparently, although in fact Elijah Wood was sitting much further back from the camera than Gandalf, and you just pull the illusion off by the way you stage the scene.
Whatever you did, you've been officially labeled a disturber of the peace.
What we've done with some of our forced perspective shots is be able to move the camera for the first time. That they were always techniques that required the camera to be locked off, because once you started to move the camera, it would give away the illusion of one person being further away when you're really wanting them to look like they're side by side.
In order to get the camera alive, we started thinking about ways of using motion control in order to doing what we call moving forced perspective shots, using slave motion control bases.
You do a motion control move where you have the one actor on a moving platform. So when the camera moves, you're doing your moves all relative. So you're literally sliding the guy along on the floor as your motion control motion control camera is moving along.
You have the camera on a motion control dolly, making it move in and out or side to side. But you have another smaller dolly that's electronically hooked to it and does the exact same motion, but sort of in a counter movement. But every time you move one way on one dolly, the other one immediately responds.
When you're actually viewing it, you're basically doing a split. And if you're doing a move around, when you do this split, it looks like they're moving in sync with each other. And it's because you're moving the two guys around relative to this moving camera.
In the shot where Frodo is pouring tea for Gandalf at a table, and the camera kind of crabs past from one side of the table to the other side. And in that instance, Ian McKellen was actually sitting on a dolly that was actually moving him slightly on a small-scale table with small-scale props. And it was not too far from a full-size table, a Frodo-size table with larger Frodo-size props.
I've got a look there.
For when he's standing?
Yeah, but I don't, and I got a look there for when Nigel's sitting. What I don't have is a look when he's crouching, which is the beginning of the shot.
Okay, well, we can give you that. We can go back to number ones and make sure that you've got that.
Through camera, at one end of the move, everything lines up. When you move to the other end of the track, everything still lines up because that smaller table and Ian McKellen on that other dolly has moved slightly.
It's kind of fun to actually build these things and see them in camera. It's wonderful. It's fun to actually just, get dailies back and the shots done.
It worked pretty seamlessly, and everyone was really amazed with the results.
In the fires of Mount Doom, taken by Isildur from the hand of Sauron himself.
Another technique that we used in order to create the sense of scale, the differences between the two actors and whatnot, is scale composites. And that's where we shoot each actor separately, and then later, the two pieces of film, put them back together again and composite them into one.
We use blue screen photography so that you could do a pass on one actor with the camera closer to him, and the smaller actor, you could repeat that pass with the camera further away again against the blue screen, and then composite those two images together, or you could shrink one image down in the computer and composite it together.
On my axe! I'm the tallest member of the fellowship. I'm sort of 6'1". So there's this problem of scale. I should be bigger than the hobbits, and yet not as tall as the elf.
In a way, it was very fortunate that Gimli was cast. John Rhys Davies played that role because his ratio in size to Elijah Wood and Sean Astin and Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan is actually correct. You're doing a multi-pass composite to get the right sizes for the hobbits and Gimli. You could photograph them all at the same time, and you'd only have to photograph separately the humans, Gandalf, Sean Bean, and Viggo Mortensen, in separate passes. So instead of having to do 3 passes for the 3 sizes, you could actually get away with 2 passes.
9 companions. So be it. You shall be the Fellowship of the Ring.
Right. Where are we going?
And when I first saw a completed bit of the film, which included a Hobbit and me, Ian Holm as Bilbo, half my size apparently on screen, and me, it was only halfway through the scene that I realized that all our trickery had worked, and that I just accepted that he had been shrunk, or that I'd been magnified. And my heart stopped for a moment, and I thought, not for the first time, we've made a very good film indeed.
Just tea, thank you.
Some other techniques that we used were as complicated as a very sophisticated stilt walking technique that Richard Taylor's group devised, so that you could put people into these big rig things and would extend their legs, and they had oversized costumes made and remote controlled hands that were twice normal size.
They're worn by very small performers who drive these big rigs around by climbing inside them.
Bess, we're going to have tankets to deal with.
This is what I do. This is the big rig character, and walking around in these things is challenging. It's a little bit scary. I can handle that.
It's like you can never be ready to jump off a cliff. You just have to take a big breath and go for it.
So when you go through the streets of Brie, or you go into Brie itself, there are a few big rigs used in that sequence. They could walk through the foreground or the background of a scene and make and be much larger than the hobbits.
Peter was really good at kind of visualizing that and knowing his shots and knowing that if he's doing a shot where he's looking down in the bar and he has the hobbits there, he could literally have just guys with big clothes on and big rubber hands walking by, which sounds very corny, and you would never want to do that in a wide shot. But in a tight shot, you're only seeing this much at the patron, and he just walks by. And so, but it still gives you this feeling that guys are walking by and that they're only 3'6" tall.
Finally, we also have used some scale doubles. We did a worldwide search for people that were actually, I think, about 4 feet tall, and found a number of very good people that have actually acted.
Looks like you're hitting a mark a bit too much, Karen.
Okay.
And you say, "It's great to see you, Gandalf." And the jump, and you sort of the jump, the hug is almost like a catch.
It's wonderful to see you, Gandalf.
They have their back to the camera, so they're far enough away that they are just wearing wigs. And in some cases, they're actually wearing prosthetic masks that are life casts of the actors that they're actually standing in for, that were done by Richard Taylor from the workshop.
As silicon slip-on masks, where we've sculpted exact copies of the lead actors and then made small silicon masks of them that our scale doubles will wear and achieve a number of the more simply got shots.
So for the wide shots, they would put our outfits on, put masks of our faces on, which was extremely bizarre, and they would kind of do the action.
And we've got Big Paul, who's was one of our doubles, who is over 7 feet tall and huge and but perfectly proportioned.
Paul is sitting at this moment in one of the oversized boats. We call him Tall Paul, which is sort of redundant because if you know him, you know how tall he is. So I mean, Paul's got to be 7 feet or more tall.
7'2".
He's 7'2", and he's doubling Aragorn.
We use them very sparingly in the film, but they also are part of the arsenal that help us create this feeling of size, perspective, and ratio.
We did use face replacement in the film. There are a few scenes in the first film where an actor's face has been put on top of another stand-in's body. Frodo carrying him away from the bridge at Khazad-dûm. He's screaming for Gandalf. That's a face replacement shot.
Again, a lot of the basic techniques that we're doing have been around in one form or another for a long time. And it's just a matter of, the tools are there. How are you going to use the tools for your situation?
What I love is that we employed every trick from like absolute latest state-of-the-art digital technology to, rubber bands, chewing gum, like whatever you could drag out of a hat, all these old sleight of hands.
For us, the approach was very much, let's use whatever will work. I think in New Zealand they call it number 8 fencing wire. And they're referring to this sort of sensibility that we do whatever it takes to get the shot.
None of this will be noticeable on screen. It will all seem to be just happening in front of your eyes.
The whole shot is a moment in a scene where you're just reinforcing on the audience this whole idea of scale in just a slightly gratuitous way, making people go, oh, cool, wow, you know, how did they do that?
I think Pete does exactly what Tolkien does, is he mentions that the hobbits are very small, and then he forgets about it for chapter and chapter and chapter, and then it'll come in again, you know, and you don't have to make a big thing of it. And then you do shots like that every now and again just to remind the audience, and then the rest is the audience imagination.